At 1446 Japan Standard Time on 11 March 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the eastern coast of Japan. The shaking damaged the off-site power supply lines feeding Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, severing the facility's connection to the external grid. 8 hours. That was the number on which everything now depended. The DC battery systems had been sized to sustain instrumentation and control for exactly that window. Enough time, engineers reasoned, for external power to be restored or for operators to execute manual intervention before the lights went dark. At 15:36 on the afternoon of 11th March 2011, the tsunami reached Fukushima Daiichi. The second wave, arriving about 10 minutes after the first, measured 14 to 15 meters in run-up height. The seawalls, standing between the ocean and the plant, had been engineered for a maximum wave height of 5.5 meters. When a design margin is exceeded by a factor of nearly 3, the layers of protection built above it begin to fall in sequence. The inundation that followed did not merely disable one system, it swept through the site, reaching the electrical switchgear rooms, the diesel generator halls, and the cable tunnels that carried power to the reactor buildings. Off-site grid power, the first line of electrical supply, had already been lost when the earthquake toppled transmission infrastructure. The emergency diesel generators, the plant's ordained backup, now sat flooded and silent. What remained, at that moment, was the final tier of the electrical architecture. The station's DC battery banks, modest in capacity, never intended to carry the plant alone for long. Flooding damaged the emergency diesel generators serving units 1 through 5, destroying the backup AC power source the plant depended on when grid power was lost. Of 6 units on site, only Unit 6 retained a functioning emergency diesel generator, the single air-cooled unit spared because it sat above the floodline. What remained were the batteries, a system engineered for a different kind of emergency, now carrying a weight it was never sized to hold. Without those readings, plant operators formally declared the core cooling safety function lost. The consequence was not merely informational. Loss of electrical power directly prevented cooling systems in Units 1 through 3 from operating. The same loss of AC and DC power that darkened the instrument panels also rendered inoperable the systems needed to move water to the fuel and made the containment venting system difficult to use. For the first 8 hours, the battery systems did exactly what they were designed to do. Operators moved through their procedures, with the batteries supplying instrumentation, control signals, and the basic electrical nervous system of the plant. Control room readings held. Operators could still see the plant, still send signals to valves and pumps, still understand what was happening inside the reactors. Every assumption embedded in the design was, in those first hours, holding true. The 8-hour figure was not a guess, it was an engineering judgment, and for 8 hours, that judgment appeared sound. With all electrical power gone in Units 1 and 2, operators found themselves staring at blank or unreliable displays, unable to determine water levels in the reactors or confirm whether any cooling system was operating at all. Unable to verify water level or cooling status, plant operators formally declared that the core cooling fundamental safety function had been lost. Operators had prepared the injection pathways, But to deliver water at low pressure, they first needed to depressurize the reactor vessel, a step that required opening the safety relief valves. With control power gone and high-pressure air unavailable, those valves would not open. A prepared crew, holding a viable plan, stood at a door the plant would not unlock. The consequences of that locked door moved on their own schedule. In Unit 1, reactor core damage is estimated to have begun approximately 4 to 5 hours after the tsunami struck. The fuel that had sustained controlled fission for years was now melting under its own residual heat. Molten material is estimated to have breached the reactor vessel bottom roughly 6 to 8 hours after the tsunami, marking the point at which containment of the fuel itself had been lost. The overheating and fuel melt were not isolated to a single unit. Reactors in Units 1, 2, and 3 all lost cooling capability and sustained the same progression of core damage. By the time cooling was lost, the fuel inside the reactor cores was generating its own catastrophic chemistry. Overheated fuel cladding, reacting with water, produced large quantities of hydrogen gas. That hydrogen migrated outward from the reactor pressure vessel into the primary containment vessel, and then further still into the reactor building itself. The gas accumulating in those spaces was invisible, but its presence was already determining what would happen next. Inside the containment vessels, a nitrogen atmosphere had suppressed ignition, but hydrogen was migrating outward into the reactor buildings themselves. Hydrogen accumulated in the reactor buildings of Units 1, 3, and 4, and the resulting explosions tore through those structures. Containment venting was attempted at Units 1 and 3, yet their primary containment vessels failed regardless. At Unit 2, venting was unsuccessful, and that containment failed as well. Each containment failure was a sealed boundary giving way under pressure and heat that had nowhere left to go. Steam, hydrogen, and radioactive material that had been confined within the primary containment vessels were now moving outward. First into the reactor buildings, then into the open environment. With battery reserves draining and no external power in sight, the operators did not stand still. They improvised across every available channel, attempting to vent containment pressure manually, routing seawater through fire engine hoses, and searching the darkened plant for any path to restore even a fraction of control power. Each move ran into the same wall. The control signals needed to open valves, confirm flow, and sequence equipment depended on the very DC power that was disappearing hour by hour. When hydrogen, accumulating in the reactor buildings, found ignition, the explosions did not merely destroy structure. They severed the improvised connections and damaged the mobile equipment operators were counting on. 9 days after the tsunami, off-site AC power was finally restored to Units 1 and 2. The station blackout that the battery systems were designed to bridge for 8 hours had lasted more than 200. By the time the lights returned, the sequence that mattered had already run its course. Batteries depleted, instrument readings lost, cooling interrupted, cores damaged, containment breached. The 8-hour design margin had been a reasonable answer to a different question. When the tsunami removed AC power and diesel generation simultaneously, the question changed. The margin did not. The plant had 2 sources of electrical power: the off-site grid that normally supplied the units, and the on-site diesel generators held in reserve for exactly the moment the grid failed. Engineers call these redundant systems. The word implies independence, that if one path closes, the other remains open. But the design basis had not adequately considered the simultaneous occurrence of an extreme earthquake and tsunami affecting multiple units at once. Both power sources, the grid and the diesels, shared one vulnerability. They could be reached by the same wave. When the tsunami arrived, it did not distinguish between the primary system and the backup. It inundated both. What had been engineered as two independent lines of defense collapsed into a single point of failure at the moment the sea rose. That is the precise definition of a correlated failure. Redundant systems that share a common vulnerability, so that the single event which defeats one defeats all. Redundancy built without accounting for correlation is not safety margin. It is the appearance of safety margin. The consequence reached beyond the plant boundary. More than 100,000 people were evacuated from surrounding areas as radionuclides released into the environment. Those evacuations are the measurable cost of an assumption that was reasonable in isolation and catastrophic in combination.